Hello, welcome to the world of wings, worms, and wonder. I'm Kelly Johnson, your Creative Nature Connection Guide, and I'm so happy you're here in my new class, Dandelion Delight, painting watercolor wildflowers and playful pollinators. In this class, you'll learn how to paint dandelions in a wild watercolor way. So we're going to actually blow the paint just like you would blow a dandelion flower into the wind. But before we do that, before you gather your supplies, do you know how fantastic dandelions are? They're in the daisy family. Their name comes from the French Dandelion, which means lion's tooth, dandelion. They're native to Eurasia, but were brought to America as a food originally, or brought to North America in general for food. Their leaves are very nutritious. Their roots are used in medicines and teas. They're fantastic for your yard. And most importantly, as pertains to this painting, they are a vital early spring nectar plant for our pollinators. So if you have dandelions in your yard, celebrate them. Let's paint them, let's enjoy them, let's learn about them, and let's leave them there for the bees and for the pollinators, and teach all our friends to leave them there as well. Not to mention, kids and grown-ups can play with them as well, and all the wishes made when blowing dandelions. So I hope you have fun with this class. Go ahead, gather your supplies, and I'll see you in the next video.
We biked out together last night for a Marshside rendezvous.
Welcome to video 1. We're going to be painting our dandelion flower heads. So you need a couple of yellows on your palette and just mix them together loosely with some water. Just get it nice and juicy. See, I'm using a lot of water here. So just get your paint flowing and make a blob, a wet blob. That's all you need to do. Anyone can do this. See, it's very fun, even children. Now take your straw and literally blow the paint. So you get a nice splash there, just like the wild petals of the dandelion. Now, make yourself another blob. Again, playing with the saturation of the paint. You see the first one had a little more water. Now I'm just going to blow it very hard. See, this one had a little more paint, so it doesn't quite blow. You got to give a little more air, a little more force. Turn your page, play with how your splatters blow across your paper, and keep going in this same fashion. Wherever you want a dandelion flower, first make your blob, add a little more water, and then blow. Just a nice splash, and let them run into each other, let them connect. So they become sort of a cohesive composition. So that one's looking a little thin. Add a little more paint in there to give a depth of color if you think it needs it. And then keep going. I'm going to do 5 flower heads. If you want to do more, do more. If you want to do less, do less. Each time, when it's very wet, making a blob and then blowing. It's all very technical art terms here, blobbing and blowing. It's very loose. You can see how you could make fun sunshines with this technique. It's kind of wild, just fun, loose. Has that air of spontaneity about it. So, you know, it's not always up to you. You have to sort of relax into the process and just let the paint go where it wants to go. Right on the watercolor paper. Add more, turn your paper, however you like your blobs to look. Just keep working with them. And then once you have your blobs where you like them, let it dry. Now we're going to add our stems and leaves. So you have your greens. I'm using hooker's green, sap green, and olive green, but you can use whatever combo of greens you want, just mixing them together loosely. And then adding where the flower attaches to the stem. So just little splashes of color, and then a line, a nice smooth line for the stem coming down. Give it a little bit of wobble. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. Make it a little dynamic. Again, adding a little green. My flowers are not 100% dry. They're partially dry. I think this is a nice way to go about it because the green blends into the yellow and integrates a little bit. So going around from each of your flowers, adding the little bud leaves and then the stems in any way that looks nice to your eye. Keeping it very loose. You see, I'm just doing little short, quick marks from the center outwards. Now for a leaf. Draw the main vein. And dandelion leaves, like named for their, remember the lion's tooth, have jagged leaf margins. So kind of like a wave shape almost on the leaf margins. And I'm adding a little more of the hooker's green in for the leaves to make them a little deeper green and bolder. I'm just filling in, keeping it very wet, very loose. We're using a wet on wet technique here. If you're not sure about your painting techniques and you're brand new to painting, you can always go to my website and my YouTube channel, wingswormswonder.com, and do my watercolor basics class, which is a free class and it's fun and teaches you all the basic techniques. And then just adding leaves. I'm just gonna see going over the stems, keeping it loose. I know from personal experience that dandelion leaves sort of grow in a rosette form. So I'm just adding them in side to side, bit of a circular-ish pattern here. I'm going to move around the painting, add a little bit gestural leaf coming out. You can see I switch brushes to make my leaves a little thicker, make filling them in a little easier. Always starting with that main vein, then doing an outline of the leaf margin, then filling in, keeping it loose, keeping it very wet, although I'm not wetting my paper first like you sometimes do in wet on wet, but I'm letting the paint do the work. I'm letting the colors blend primarily on the paper. You see, adding in splashes of color. I've got 3 leaves and then a little gesture of a leaf. I'm going to add one more leaf behind, and you can do your leaves any way that looks good to you based on the shape of your paper. Maybe you've got a square piece of paper, it looks different based on how your dandelion flowers blew out onto the page, how they're overlapping, how you want them to overlap with the leaves. So just working, to your eye, so making this leaf go a little behind that flower. If you don't want the green to blend into the yellow, remember to leave a small line of white. So the paint will only go where the paper is wet with paint or water. So if you want to keep a hard edge, leave dry paper in between. You see I added a little hooker's green here to darken it up like a shadow where a leaf falls behind. Add a little depth and dimension to the stems, to where the stems attach to the flowers. Just moving loosely and freely around the paper. Make sure not to put your hand in. I've done that a million times. Bring some stems in front if that looks good to your eye. Send some behind. This whole project is very process oriented, so just enjoy it. Now let it dry completely, and I'll see you in the next video. And we'll add our pen outlines and our pollinators. Now we're going to use our pen to add some definition. So observing this little dandelion I have, I'm looking at how it's a little wild. It's got little spikes and little leaves and little petals coming off every which way that are all very angular. And now my painting is completely dry. And so I'm going in with, I'm using a Pigma Micron pen here, but as long as your paper's dry, you can use pretty much any pen you want. I am using a 01 size black. You could use a sepia would be nice, and I'm adding in these spiky shapes. You could call them pointy M's, pointy W's, pointy V's, pointy zigzags. But just to sort of add a little bit of definition to the flowers, a little bit of a harder outline because we've got a lot of abstraction going on here. Not that these shapes are very, photorealistic to a dandelion by any means, but it just defines it a bit, and going in and defining the edges of some of the leaves. Now, this step is completely optional. If you don't want to do this, don't do this. I'm going to do it on some of them, but not others, so you can see. Now, you could do definition and pen outlines on the dandelion flowers you wanted to appear in the foreground, and leave ones in the background with outlines that will help set them back as well. So play with it, see what you like. Practice your little zigzaggy shapes on a different piece of paper if you want. See how I'm not tracing like a coloring book. I'm just adding some definition lines in here and there. I'm not giving a full outline to any of it. I'm just adding a little depth. See how it makes the flowers look a bit more three-dimensional, a little less flat. So moving around the painting, popping a line in here gives a bit of a shadow to the underside of a stem. Just loose, however you like the look, and stop when you want to stop. Now, moving in to the next step, the words. Get your pencil ready. You can have a scratch paper to practice. I have practiced my cursive quite a bit, and again, I'm keeping this very loose. You could print out a font and trace it on if you wanted to. However loose or tight you want to do this. I'm treating this as processy, sketchy, so I'm freehanding it. And I say, grow dandelions and help the bees. Now that I've got it written out in pencil, always do pencil first. I inevitably spell something wrong. I'm tracing over it, again, tracing loosely in pencil. I'm not going over every single perfect little mark, not trying to make this perfect. That's not what we're about here. We're about having fun, and we're about process with this project. So just adding your quote. I used green. You could use any color you like. You could use a bright pink. You could use a sepia to tie into, or a black to tie into your outlines, whatever you like. And then you can go back once your ink is completely dry and erase the pencil lines, any pencil lines that. So I'm going to hold off on that. And while I wait just to make sure, because sometimes you think the ink is dry and it's not and it smears, we're going to work on our pollinators. So doing little sprigs starting at a central point and doing like 1, 2, 3 brush strokes, 1, 2, 3 brush strokes, 1, 2, 3. You can see it's, you're thinking of the shape of a bee's body. So kind of in an arch, but again, very loose. You can see how I'm doing just some gestural brush strokes coming from what would be the bee's abdomen. Just moving around. The reason I did the words before the bees was because once I saw where the words are, then I would decide where I wanted the bees to be and how the bees might interact with the words. So that's why I waited there. I do 5 dandelions, 5 leaves, and 5 bees. Now, getting that sepia paint. My bees are not completely dry. I chose sepia instead of black. You might think, well, bees are black and yellow. Black can be a little harsh with the paint, and when black mixes with yellow, we often get a very drab green, and bees, these bees anyway, are not green bees. These are like bumble bees. So in that same fashion that you did with the yellow, adding 1, 2, 3 brush strokes, 1, 2, 3, starting from a central point and brushing outwards. I'm using a 0 size brush here. So 1, 2, 3, and thinking of the stripes. Do you see how I'm leaving the yellow? Start with the yellow because it's the lighter color. Now I'm adding gestures of legs and head. Again, very gestural, very loose little bees here. Going back in and darkening up the paint if it need be. Always you start lighter. You can always go back in and add darker paint, more layers. If you want, you can go back in and add more yellow if you feel like the sepia took over the yellow a little bit. And now add your wings. Notice my wings are very light. It's a very watered down sepia because wings are clear. So adding wing shapes, moving around each bee. See how they're very, very loose little fun little pollinators. And once the paint starts to dry and soak into the paper, you may notice it needs to be darkened up, especially on the abdomen of the bee. Once you've got your bees how you like them, you can go in and start to add antenna, just 2 very light brush strokes from whatever side you want the head of the bee to be. So remember, insects all have 2 antennae, 6 legs, and 4 wings. Well, we didn't paint 4 wings, we just did 2. We're pretending you just can't see the others here. Because again, this is just a loose, fun dandelion and pollinator project to celebrate spring, celebrate wildflowers, and celebrate this particular little flower that brings so much joy to early spring. And I'll see you in the next video, and we'll finish up this project. Hello again, welcome back. I hope you've had a blast painting some dandelions in a wild and whimsical watercolor playful way, and had fun painting your little pollinator bees to go along with them. Now you can use this same watercolor blowing technique with a straw to do any sort of wild kind of wildflower, like a zinnia, or anything with like spiders. You could paint any kind of thing that might have legs or palm frondy kind of whoosh, like splashes. So it's a fun technique that you can apply in as many areas as your imagination can come up with. So I hope you enjoyed this class. Go ahead and start your project below, and be sure to upload photos. Be sure to also follow me to stay updated and lots more fun activities at wingswormsandwonder.com, and on Instagram, wingswormsandwonder, for lots more fun, lots more art projects, lots more creative nature connecting. So I hope to see you in these other venues. I hope you have fun. I hope you enjoy the rest of my classes here on Skillshare, and have a great day. Bye.
We biked out together last night for a marshside rendezvous. Your reflectors slowly revolving around and reflecting